Karate friends, welcome to Classics in Color, your weekly dive into some of the ancient world's wackiest facts. I'm Mark Graves, and today's topic is inspired by an article entitled Public Health in Roman Legislation, written by Lex Aquileia. So we often think of things like public healthcare and public sanitation, etc. as being modern inventions, but that's only true to an extent. Ancient countries definitely had an interest in keeping their populations at least somewhat healthy, and we can see that through some of the laws that they passed. So today's project is we're just going to look at a few different Roman laws and what they imply for public health in ancient Rome. So let's get started. So the very earliest law that we're aware of that had to do with medicine in any way is the Lex Regia. So this comes from about the 8th century BC, and supposedly it was instituted by the king Numa Pompilius, so one of Rome's earliest kings. And it basically said that if a woman was in labor and she was struggling and then it looked like she's gonna die, she's not gonna make it, then the midwife or whoever's with her is required to attempt to perform a cesarean section and retrieve the baby or the fetus. So this is a very grim, violent example to start off on, and it's not entirely clear what it tells us. It's possible that Rome was experiencing some sort of population crisis at this point, and so they feel like they need to save every baby possible. There could be other explanations as well. It's a little bit of a mystery, but yeah, very, very violent start. Several of these laws were not just misguided or completely made up. They did actually have potential to do some help, to do some good. For example, there was a general prohibition on burying corpses within the actual city proper of Rome. So if you wanted to bury someone, you had to take them outside of the city. And I guess I'm not a sanitation expert, but I assume generally that is a good idea to separate corpses. My next example is not actually a law, but it was an action undertaken by the legislature, so I'm going to count it. In about 292 BC, there was a plague that was afflicting Rome, and the legislature decided that, they needed to do something to try to counteract this. So they sent an ambassador to Epidaurus. Epidaurus is in Greece, and it is a central, really important cult center for this god Aesclepius, who is the major healing god in both the Greek and Roman pantheons. So he has big temples where people will come and seek healing. So Rome sends a delegation to Epidaurus, and they request that a delegation come back with them to Rome to help them deal with this problem. So Epidaurus agrees. They send some people on a ship, and when they're loading up the ship, the sacred snake that lives in the temple of Aesclepius leaves the temple and gets on the ship with the delegation. So that seems like that's a pretty good omen, right? And then when the ship finally gets to Rome, it sails up the Tiber River, which goes kind of through and by Rome, and it stops off at Tiber Island, and the snake leaves the ship. It comes out and gets onto the island, and this again is taken as a very important, significant sign, and so the legislature decides to build a temple to Aesclepius on this island. Now, the article I was reading speculated that maybe this was sort of intentionally manipulated, but even if it wasn't intentional, it could still have had an unintentional benefit. Namely, you build the temple to the god of healing on this island, and then everybody who's sick and symptomatic will leave the city, the general population, and they'll come separate onto this island. This is a little bit out of the city, a little bit separated. And so you might get some benefit there of separating off all the sick and the symptomatic. A lot of the laws that we have to do with regulating medical practitioners. So there is a Lex Aquileia, which basically just imposes severe penalties on anyone who causes death on a patient because of negligence. So it's very interesting to see something like that so early on. I certainly wouldn't have expected it, but you see it there in the law. Next up, there are many different kinds of medical practitioners in the ancient world, just like there are today. So we have therapists, nurses, doctors, surgeons, homeopathic people, etc. There are just so many. Same thing in the ancient world. There are many different classes and types of people who work in medicine, but I guess the class that got regulated the most were the public doctors. So these are people who are either appointed or maybe in some cases elected by their city, by their neighborhood, by their country, and then also funded by their city, their neighborhood, etc. So these people are subject to a fair bit more regulation than just sort of your midwife around the corner. For example, there was a law passed in 386 AD that required anyone who was one of these public doctors to treat people who are poor for free. So if somebody cannot pay you for your services, you are still required to treat them because you are getting paid this public salary. Now, it's kind of vague. There's a lot of details we wish we knew about this. For example, is the expectation that you just treat everyone for free? Or, if you can pay, then are you expected to pay? And you only cannot pay if you can't. So, what is going on here on the day-to-day? We don't know, and we wish we did. But it is interesting to see that at least some people seem to have been getting healthcare for free for at least parts of the Roman Empire. Who knows? But there were benefits that came with being a public doctor. Obviously, you get a salary. In 46 BC, Julius Caesar granted all physicians in Rome citizenship. So this was probably intended to encourage immigration from places like Greece, where doctors were trained in a particular way, and Rome wanted to encourage people with that set of skills to emigrate to Rome and work there. And then later, Augustus also freed all of these official doctors from taxes. So it was a position that came with quite a few benefits. And later in 200 AD, Antoninus Pius limited those benefits because people were starting to take advantage of them a little bit, just to people who had suitable credentials and to people who had been officially elected to this position. And he limited the amount of people who could be elected to this position. So just trying to tamp down on all of those people trying to take advantage of that sweet tax break. Finally, public sanitation, keeping things clean, was definitely a job of the government. So usually there would be somebody like a praetor who is made responsible for street maintenance. And of course, he doesn't clean the streets himself. That would be ridiculous. It's a little vague how he goes about doing it, but it seems like he either paid a private contractor to maintain the part of the streets that he was in charge of, or two, there's some indication in Pliny that penal slaves, so slaves that are being punished, would be forced to clean sewers or maintain streets, etc. So there's actually a really funny story about this from Suetonius's life of the Emperor Calligula. So Calligula knew that this fellow Vespasian, who was an aedile, which is a type of public official, this guy Vespasian had been assigned street cleaning supervising duties, and Calligula was disappointed with his performance. He thought that maybe he was cheaping out, he wasn't paying people to keep the streets clean. Either way, he thought the streets were filthy, and so he ordered his soldiers to stuff mud down Vespasian's toga, which is super childish and petty, and I love it. So I think that all of this stuff about sewers and medical regulations is just super fascinating. Hopefully you did as well. Thank you so much for checking out this video and for sticking all the way to the end. Special thank you, as always, to subscribers and to Patreon members, and I hope to see all of you again next week. Karate.